say 8:30, so in an attempt to not get us behind before we get started, we'll go ahead and kick things off. Welcome everyone, wherever you may be logging in from out there. My name is Rick Ellis. You probably can see that already up on the screen there. I'm going to be your presenter for this session on field to finish in Carlson survey. I'm also going to be doing some Carlson survey tips and tricks in the next class after this. I believe that's 10:30 to noon today. And then tomorrow morning, I'll be doing some Civil 3D stuff. Kind of similar, actually, some field to finish stuff in Civil 3D. So if you want to compare and contrast, you can sit in on both of those. And then a session on template setup and data organization, XREFs, data shortcuts, all that type of thing in Civil 3D tomorrow morning. So that'll be 8:30 and 10:30 again tomorrow. So just a quick introduction. I know I've met a number of you at previous conferences and different things, but just so you have a bit of an idea of who I am. Like I said, my name's Rick. I've been doing stuff related to this with civil survey software since back in the mid 90s, basically, which takes us back to the old ADCAD, DCA, Softdesk, then Land Desktop, and now Civil 3D. And Carlson has come along the way and been a part of that for a long time as well. Technically, for those of you, since we're this is an Oregon conference and we want to get a little more specific geography-wise, I'm technically in Canby, so a little bit south of Portland. But I spend most of my time working with clients directly, either doing training or consulting work, helping set up standards and workflows and those types of things with that. So kind of enough about me on that. I don't want to belabor the point too much. The other thing I have done is I have written a number of books on both AutoCAD, Civil 3D, and Carlson software. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about in this field to finish class, I've got a lot more detail on in our Carlson survey book, because there's a lot of things you can do, obviously, with that. As far as questions go, this is a little bit different than a traditional conference where we're all sitting in a room and it's just easy to raise your hand or jump in and ask questions and things like that. So I'm going to pause at some different times and give us a chance to take questions. I've got Lori helping me out, watching the Q&A and the chat from both Zoom and Huba. So if you type something in there, we can certainly get to some of those questions and talk about those. My email address is also up here. So if there's something that you want to contact me about and take offline, we can absolutely do that. Because I know some of these questions are going to be, they can get very specific, because really what I found from working with lots of different survey companies and organizations is that people don't do it the same company to company. You all have different needs, different preferences, different workflows. And one of the nice things about Carlson is it can be pretty flexible within that. And we just need to talk about what you want to do and how you want to do it and what your options are and kind of figure it out from there. So often those answers aren't a 30-second answer here in the middle of a presentation. We want to dig deeper into those, so I want to make sure you can contact me if you want. I'm fine with that. Also related to things, I'm going to do very little PowerPoint for you and try to spend as much time as we can in Carlson Survey. So maximizing your screen or going to the full screen version of the conference software so that you can see things will probably help with that. And if you get stuck or have questions with that, I'm sure you can just type a question into the chat or into the Q&A area, and Lori will probably just jump in and help you out there if there's anything you're stuck on. But that will definitely make it easier for you to see. So let's get into this a little bit as far as what do we mean when we talk about field to finish, because it does mean different things to different people. And different programs have kind of jumped on this term, and they tend to work differently and have different options. So it's really just, it's automating the process of dealing with our points and potentially line work as well. So points, what layers do they go on to? What symbol might get inserted with them automatically? What layer would that symbol go on to if we want to control that separately? And then, do we want to draw line work between these points? And Carlson has the option for us to draw 2D and or 3D polylines, because we've probably all ran into the issue at different times where you have a 3D polyline in AutoCAD and you want to try to put a line type on that. And without going into lots of details, long story short, it just doesn't work very well. And that line type may not show up at all. It might show up on some segments and not others because it's looking at the slope of that line, basically from the top down. Lots of problems there. And that's just a problem with AutoCAD line types, because really we're using the same line type functionality in AutoCAD that we had 20 plus years ago, or 30 years ago at this point. I believe I saw that just a day or two ago was officially AutoCAD's 39th birthday. So from a software standpoint, it's been around a long time, and really line types are things that haven't changed much as we've moved from a 2D to a 3D world in these drawings. So a lot of times what happens is people end up needing to draw 2D line work for drafting purposes, so that looks correct on their plats there, and 3D line work for break lines in their surfaces. And lots of people end up going and tracing over the top of things, or doing things twice, or copying them and different options. Well, the field to finish tools in Carlson has an option that just says draw both. So when it draws the line work for you automatically, it does them both at the same time, and we'll put them on different layers for you so that you can manage that. So we'll take a look at that, but that's one of the things that field to finish does. Now, there's lots of other things, advanced features that field to finish will do as well. Things like resizing tree symbols based on parameters that you may have collected in the field. So rather than having one symbol for all your trees, if you're doing a tree survey and have been asked to show the actual drip line or diameter of the trunk of the tree, you can have the symbol resized properly for that. We can do things like managing and displaying measure down information for manholes and things like that. Lots of different things. We're going to start off with some of the core stuff in here, as if you hadn't used field to finish in Carlson at all. And then later on in the presentation, we'll get into some of the more advanced features also. The big thing here, and where a lot of people say, I don't want to do field to finish, is because they think that it's going to require you to make just massive changes on how you do things out in the field. And I'm not going to say it means that you make no changes out in the field, because you're probably going to need to make some, but they're probably not going to be major, earth-shattering, significant changes. If you saw some of the automated line work in the field commands that were around years ago when some of these things first came out, they were really cumbersome. And the idea that I don't want to do this because I'm going to spend way more time in the field than I'm going to save in the office, or my field guys can't figure this out, or some of these excuses or reasons for not doing it were very valid at the time. And if you saw something like that in the past and said, that's not for us, and have not looked at it since, I would encourage you, take a look here with an open mind, because this is different than it used to be from that standpoint. So we'll talk about that as well, what has to be done in the field and to make this come in properly. The other thing I would add to this is, don't look at this as an all or nothing type thing. Some people will look at the few instances where they may have problems with field to finish and use that as a reason not to use the feature in general. I guess I'm maybe more of a glasses half full type of a guy, because I'm going to look at this and say, well, maybe we don't do 100% of everything with field to finish and it's all drawn perfectly in the office for me. But if I got 75% of it done, that's a huge benefit. And, especially when you're starting off, this all doesn't have to be perfect. Go get the low hanging fruit. Pick up the stuff that is easiest for you to use as far as line work goes, and that you'll get the most benefit out of. And you can probably think about what those particular features are there and start there, have some success, and see how far you want to go with it. So, back to, why should we use it with that? Really, I think if you give this a shot, you're going to see that there are some really significant time savings with it. Without, again, huge changes in what you're doing out in the field, you can probably save some really significant time in the office. The other part of this kind of gets into what your workflow is like. Now, I know some people have, field crews and office crews, and they really don't overlap much, while others have the field crew that goes out and collects the data, comes in and brings it into CAD as well. But either way, this can kind of lead towards some better thoughts about data ownership. Where if the people collecting the data are the ones managing it, whether they actually bring it into CAD in the office or not, they at least should be communicating a little bit more with that office group and understanding how this works, just at least on a basic level. And kind of what I mean by that is, even if it's two separate groups, when I go teach this at on site at an office, I'll often, if we can, use just a little bit of the time to get both groups together so that we talk about some real, basics and fundamentals about how that is going to be brought into the drawing, and also how it should be collected. And then the best thing to do is just, take everybody, even out to the parking lot, and collect a little bit of data, bring it back in, run it through field to finish, and see what worked and what didn't, and why it worked and why it didn't. And pretty quickly, those two groups are communicating really well with each other, talking about, maybe what could be done differently, and And it just makes that process a lot smoother than keeping those disjointed. So what I want to do to start with is give you a little bit of kind of showing you an example of an end product. You know, what's it look like when we bring something in that's been set up not to the highest extent that it possibly could be, but quite a bit with field to finish. And then we're going to back up from there and talk about, you know, really what are the nuts and bolts of how you set this up. So I'm going to jump over to Carlson Survey. I've got Carlson Survey open, and just so that you all understand where I'm at with this, or what you're seeing, because there are different versions and flavors of Carlson. I'm running Carlson Survey 2021, and I'm running it on AutoCAD. Now, just so that you know, there's a number of different ways that you can purchase Carlson. And I'm not a Carlson reseller, so I am not here to sell it to you. I just want to make sure that if you feel like yours doesn't look exactly like mine, that you understand why that's the case. Carlson Survey can run on AutoCAD. It can also run on IntelliCAD. Those two cost the same. The only difference, I mean, and actually it's the same install. You just pick how you want to install it as you're installing the program. So you don't even download a different file. But the only difference is one's running on IntelliCAD, the other one's running on AutoCAD. AutoCAD you might be a little bit more familiar with, but you have to pay for AutoCAD. IntelliCAD basically just comes with Carlson Survey. So, and IntelliCAD has improved tremendously over the last few years, and it is very similar to AutoCAD. And I think, at least for me, learning IntelliCAD as an AutoCAD user didn't really take much. There were a few things that looked a little bit different, not many at all, and most of the commands were basically the same. There is a third method of buying Carlson Survey, and it's called the Carlson Survey OEM. And that includes an OEM version of AutoCAD in it. So that one is going to cost a little bit more because it includes AutoCAD. You don't have to buy AutoCAD separately. Now, that is not a full version of AutoCAD. Basically, what Autodesk does is they license the OEM CAD engine to different companies like Carlson and anybody else who wants to build their program on AutoCAD. And it's kind of like an a la carte version of CAD. They go in and they pick the commands that they want to have. And the more commands they pick, the more it costs, which is a cost that unfortunately has to get passed on to you all when you buy it. So they pick the commands that they think everybody's going to want within AutoCAD and build that into the Carlson Survey OEM version. And the reason I bring that up is, that's going to be AutoCAD, but there might be some commands that you've used before that you'd find aren't there because they didn't pick them and pay for them. So 3 different ways that you can use this, or that you can buy it, and it will look a little bit different. Now, the commands we're going to go through with field to finish are the same for all of them, or all those versions. So don't worry about that. It's more the CAD commands that might look slightly different, and the interface might look slightly different. So I'm just going to open up a drawing that I have in a project that I call Field to Finish Complete. Now, this drawing is empty. I don't have anything in it. I just didn't want to go through the the process of making up a new one or anything like that to speed us up. So if I had a new blank drawing and I imported some points, so there already are points in this Carlson project. They're in the CRD file. I can see I've got one here called 6_7. That was the name of my CRD file. And if I wanted to just show you, I could look at the list points command, and when that comes up, what we'll see is here is this list of points. I can see their numbers, northing, eastings, elevations, and descriptions. There are a few extra codes entered into some of these, which we'll talk about later on. And all I'm going to do, because I'm going to assume that we had this all set up already, is I'm just going to go to survey and pick field to finish to run the draw field to finish command. Now here is an area where it says split all about how I want to handle multiple codes. And we'll talk more about multiple codes later. For right now, just understand that multiple codes means that you could put 2 different codes or more on the same point. So, for example, if you had line work for the edge of pavement and a driveway, and the driveway is going to go off in one direction, the edge of pavement goes off in the other, that could be the same point. You don't have to stack 2 points on top of each other, and the line work will recognize that. I'm just going to say, yeah, go ahead and split and use those. And we'll talk more about this dialog box later. All I'm going to say is, let's just go run this. I have all my settings already done. So if you had everything set up, it would bring in all the points, put them on different layers. They're going to have different symbols on them and be different sizes based on how our field to finish was set up. You can see my manhole here has one symbol, and the iron rod has a different size of that. I've got trees at different sizes. Some of the line work was labeled with this concrete text. And this is both 2D and 3D. If I go to the view pull down and look at the 3D viewer and the drawing viewer, and I'll just pick everything. Expand this a little bit so it's easier to see. And if I rotate this around, you can see here I've got line work that is 2D down at elevation 0. I also have line work and points that are at their actual elevation. And I can control how we, have set that up. So even though this might not be perfect and totally complete, this is a tremendous amount of drawing that I would have had to do in the office just from a drafting standpoint to get this far. That really could all be done just by a little bit of coding out in the field, not a whole lot, and a fair amount of setup in the office before we get started. So that's just, I wanted to show you kind of what we can do before I show you some of the really, kind of boring and tedious, how do we set all of this up type of thing. So let's switch back over here and talk about what pieces do we have to put together? Most of field to finish is driven by the FLD file. That's a Carlson file that's going to save all of this. And as long as you do things consistently out in the field, you can use the same FLD file for all of your projects. Now, you might have different clients that have different requirements, so you might make up different FLD files for each client if you needed to. But you could be as simple as just one FLD file. And once you come into this, you can see you can pick different codes and just go to an edit button, and that will take us through editing and setting up that code. So if I would have picked a code, picked edit, you can see the edit codes dialog box here. It's got 3 tabs at the top: general, symbol, and line type. We'll talk about these in detail once we get into it. But on this general tab, this is where you would put in the code. That's the code that was used, out in the field. You can give it a full name. This name is really just an identifier that's here. It's not going to show up in the drawing. The description is what would show up in the drawing. So that's kind of the full description, as Civil 3D might call it, if any of you have used that. And then you have a main layer. What is this going to go on to? So you can put in whatever layer name you want to use for that. If you leave it like this, it puts the symbol and the point and all of its text, that block, on the same layer. There is an option for you to use a distinct point layer. And if you toggle that on, it will put the point on whatever layer you specify here. And then by default, the symbol will go on this main layer, along with any line work that you might draw. There's also a dual 3D polyline layer that you can set, which brings us down to the bottom left corner of this dialog box where it says entity type. Notice this one is points only, but I can do lines, 2D polylines, 3D polylines, or 3D and 2D polylines. So if you do both of them, then this dual 3D polyline layer would be important if you wanted to put the 3D polylines on one layer and the 2D on a separate one. So sometimes, I'll set things up and I'll just put all my 3D polylines on a layer called break lines, because I really don't need to differentiate those. But my 2D polylines, I'll put them on layers like edge of pavement and center line and back of sidewalk and whatever I'm going to call those. There is an attribute scaler that's here. Carlson uses this term scalar, and it's kind of a goofy one, I know. What it really means is, what height do you want to plot the attributes on this point? So if our drawing has a horizontal drawing scale set of 1 inch equals 50, then this would scale them to plot at 0.1, so all the attributes on the point blocks would be a size of 5. If it was this scale of 20, they'd be a size of 2. It's the same math that you've probably all done manually for a long time. In this case, Carlson's going to resize those for you. And this is per code. So if I said, I want the control points to show up really big and so that they stand out, I could change the scalar of just the code for the control points to be 0.25 or something like that. Everything else is 0.1, so those would be larger. There's also this attribute ID layout. We'll talk more about that later because just showing you some examples, but Carlson has different ways that the points can be displayed. We'll look at that. And then there's locate points on real Z. Well, if that is checked, it's going to put the point at its actual elevation. So if the point's at elevation 100, it would be inserted into the drawing at elevation 100 plus have the attribute value at 100. If you toggle that off, the points are inserted at 0, but they still have the attribute value of whatever their elevation was, and that attribute value is what's going to be used when you build a surface. And speaking of surfaces, there is this non-surface toggle that you can turn on. So if you know that in this case, I have a light pole, and maybe we never want to use our light poles as elevations in our surface. If you toggle non-surface on, in that case, even if you selected those points when you built your tin, it would skip them. So lots of things that you can control here, setting up the codes. And you can see this is the part that's going to take you a little while to refine how you want different codes handled and displayed. But you can also see how much work that can save you as well, because it's really going to organize your drawing. The other thing to talk about here is special codes. Now remember, Field to Finish calls a code, the description that you entered out in the field on your point. The special codes are command codes, really, that run things. So for instance, this is for our, here's our line work special codes. So the way that this was set up, ST would start a line, END would end it. But you can change these to anything you want. Some people use B for begin, E for end, and that's it. So in the field, if I typed in a description of an edge of pavement as EP space E, it's a space delimited format. So after the space, it thinks it's a special code or a command code, and it would know that's where we begin the line on the edge of pavement. So you can change any of these to anything you want. The only trick here is these special codes can't be the same thing as your codes that you use for your actual points, because you can see where the confusion would be. If I was using these special codes, and I also had a code for a point that I put in that was called ST, then and maybe ST was supposed to be for a stop sign or something like that. It doesn't matter what it is. But if it was supposed to be a stop sign, it doesn't know if I'm trying to begin a line or if that's a stop sign. So they just can't conflict. That's the only thing you got to watch for. And if there are conflicts, when you load the file, you'll actually get some command line warnings that say, hey, this is an invalid code because it's duplicate. So long story short with this, all of these can be customized to whatever you would like to use. So if you're coming from a different program and you've done line work in the field with something else, and you want to just keep it the same for all your field guys, you can probably customize this to where it is the same and very little changes on their part. So very flexible. So once you set up all your field codes and your special codes, then you'll go through this draw field to finish command. And all this command does is it looks at your FLD file
And it also looks at your current point file. So these points have already been imported into our Carlson CRD file. So if it was just an ASCII file, you did the import, we just haven't drawn them into the drawing yet. And that means every time we just rerun field to finish, it just looks at our CRD file and runs it through the filter set up by the FLD file that we created. And it knows then what layer to put the points on, what symbol to use, how big they should be, does it draw lines, what attribute layout, do I resize the trees, all of that stuff it knows how to deal with. There's also an option that you can pick which points to run field to finish on. Maybe you don't want to run it on everything. Maybe you just brought in a few new points and they're in a particular point group. You can pick them by group, or you can type in a range of numbers and it will draw just certain ones. You can tell it to draw points, lines, symbols, and 3D faces, or any combination of those. And you can also limit the area where you're drawing it. So on big projects, and maybe you only want to redraw a certain area because there were some changes to it, you could window that or select a polyline and limit that area that you're drawing it to. And then there's options about things like erasing the previous field to finish entities. So if you're redrawing things, it doesn't just keep drawing duplicates on top of those. It erases those, and it knows what was a field to finish entity. It knows what it drew before. So you don't have to manually go out and pick these objects and erase them. So once you draw them, you can edit things a couple of ways. You can go to individual points and edit the point, rerun field to finish, and go. There's also this command that I'll show you in a few minutes called the field to finish inspector. And it lets you select objects by code. And then the instance is the line work that might have been drawn between those codes. And then if you pick a certain instance, it shows you a certain point, and it will zoom to these or isolate the objects on the screen so they're easier to see. And if you edit the description and apply that, it just reruns that particular code and updates it real time in the drawing. So let's take a look at how we could get started with some of that. And I'm sure there's some questions. We'll get to those in just a minute after I kind of show you the starting of some of this, which may answer a few questions. So I'm going to leave this drawing behind and go open up a different one here. I've got a field to finish start drawing. And again, this one is an empty drawing. I don't have anything here. I can see by going to the points and list points for all of them that I have a whole bunch of points. However, these, if you look at them very carefully, you'll notice these do not have any coding after them. There's no commands. So this is something that was not collected in any way with field to finish in mind. So I bring that up because everybody has one of these files with that. And I'm just going to see what happens if I try to ram this through field to finish, because I didn't even talk to my field crew about this. It's done nothing. So I'm going to start by going to the field to finish command, and I'm going to go to edit codes. So this is not the file that I want, the FLD file I want to use. So instead, I'm going to make a new one. I'm saying I'm starting out from scratch. Here, I went to the conference. I thought field to finish looked cool. I want to try it out. So here in the editor, I can pick code table by points. And if I pick that, it lets me pick a default symbol.
Seems like Hey, Rick, I do have somebody, Tim Alcover, wants to know, is deleting the points on the screen, does it not delete the points from the data?
Yes, that is a great question. Deleting points from the screen, does it delete points from the data? Depends on what command you use. The points are stored in a external file. They're in a CRD file. So if you use the AutoCAD erase command, it will not delete them. Depending on if you have link points to database set or not. I'll show you those commands in just a moment, so that because I'm kind of stuck in a dialog box here, but I'll show you that. To delete them from the database permanently, you do need to go in and pick a Carlson command, a point erase command, and it will prompt you, do you want to delete them from the database or not? And then when you say, yes, I do, I believe it even prompts you again and says, are you really sure? And then it deletes them. So it's kind of hard to accidentally delete them with that, but that's a great question. I'll show you that in just a moment. I'm just going to pick this X as my default symbol. And it says, do you want to create a new FLD file or append it to an existing one? So I'm going to say new. And I'll just name it PLSO1. And I'll save that. And what it just did was it looked at my point database. And for every unique description that it found, it made up a code for me. And by default, I can see here, it put them on a layer that was the same thing as their code. Now, that's probably not what I want, but it's at least a start. And it's better than me, having to go through and think about what was every single code that we used. So here it gives me at least a start of it, as long as I've got an example file to work off of. To edit any one of these, I could go in and click edit. There's my ground shot. The description is going to be GND. Maybe I want it to go on a layer called PNTS-GND, and I just want it to be a point. There is this attribute layout ID, and it just shows 1 through 9 of them, which is, that doesn't mean anything to you, I'm sure. It certainly didn't mean anything to me when I saw it first. If I pick preview, though, it shows you a little preview, and it's probably pretty hard to see on this, but this has the point number kind of on top of the point, the elevation out to the right, and then the description back underneath the point. Number 2 lines them up like what you're more used to seeing. Number, elevation, description, all aligned correctly. So I'll pick that. I could pick a different symbol if I wanted to. For right now, I'm just going to pick OK there. And I'm not going to go through every one of these because that would get pretty boring with you, but let me grab something that might look a little bit different. Like here, let's grab this light pole. And I'm going to say I want it to use a different symbol. So if I pick that and scroll through my symbol library, we can find something else, maybe that looks like a light pole. And I'll say okay for that. Now, if you wanted to edit everything, there are some commands or some things you can do kind of globally. So if I do like select all and then edit, here's an option where I could pick the layout ID. You know, set all of them to 2. You know, maybe they're on a non-surface or a real Z. I want to set that on all of them or something like that. We could do that. I'll just pick exit after that. You know, if I picked you know, the main layer, I could put them all in the same one. I'm not going to do that. We'll leave it separate. But I will go over and I'm going to go to these driveway points. These, I want 2D and 3D lines drawn for those. And I'll leave the descriptions the same. I'll put it on a layer called PNTS-driveway. And my dual 3D polyline layer, I'll do brake line. As my layer. Now over on the line type tab, since we're connecting lines, there's options here for my line type to be bilayer or not. You probably want to leave it as bilayer. You can also give it a connection order. And that connection order is either sequential or nearest found. So it will let you connect them by proximity. You know, the closest lines with the same description would connect. I'm going to do sequential still. I'll just click OK on this. I'll do the other driveway the same way. Remember, we said it was 3D and 2D. My layer was going to be PNTS-driveway. And dual 3D polyline goes on the brake lines layer. Or brake line, I think, singular. So that will be okay for there. I want to do one other as this building corner. I'm just going to do a 2D polyline on it. Put it on layer PNTS-BLDG. And on the line type tab, there's an option to hatch closed areas. And then I could pick, you know, a hatch pattern for that. So I'll just do kind of a standard one. It goes on a layer called hatch. I can give it a scale. So for all those buildings, if they're closed, it would hatch them. And I could continue through this, but I don't want to bore you too much with the details of, you know, or just the repetitiveness of setting up one after another. But you kind of get the idea. The entity type for toe and top, I'm going to do just 3D polylines on those two, just so we get a little bit more line work.
So when I save this, what it's saving is this FLD file. And if I go to my code table settings, and here go to special codes. We saw this before. I got begin is ST and end is END. I'm going to change that to B for begin, E for end. And then close is CLS. All right. So I've saved those. When I exit, I come back out here. And when I pick OK to draw this, this doesn't look very good. We kind of got a little bit of the whole spaghetti thing going on. But remember, I didn't do anything in the field. So I could go in and either edit some of these manually, or I could do it in the field to finish inspector. If I wanted to edit them manually, just looking at this, here is a top point. And if I look at them sequentially, it's 1140, 1141, 1142, and 1143 is the top on the other side. Maybe I don't want those connected. One way I could change this is just by double clicking on 1142 to bring up the point editor. And for my CRD file description, I can put it as top space E for end. So you might be thinking, you never gave it a start point. There was no start code for this. That's because when we tell field to finish to make line work out of a particular code, there's a setting that we can tell it to just automatically start at the first instance of that code. So you don't even have to have your field guys put in a begin statement or a start statement on it, because it will automatically start. And what's going to happen here, if I move this out of the way, when I tell 1142, that's the end. When it comes to 1143, it will automatically put a begin or a start on it. So I just changed that value. Now it didn't update anything here. I could do a couple more. I could look at 1121, 1122. I could either put a start here, because I know the previous one needs to have an end. So I could go to that one for toe and tell it that is B for begin. Now, I'm not being super consistent, but it's right there, and that's the easy thing to do, because anytime that it sees a begin on this code, it knows that the previous point that used that code had to be an end. So it automatically puts that in. Now, I could just go back and rerun field to finish. And here's an instance where it's going to erase these points and redraw them. It's only erasing them from the drawing, not from the database. So I just tell it redraw everything here. I can see this is cleaned up. I don't have the connection here. So is this one. If I double click, you'll see that is my description in the CRD file. And I would see it under points, list points also. What were we at? 1142, I think. There it is. There's that begin code. There's that other end code.
So that's one way I could edit. I could just double click, make the edit, and let it reprocess there manually. Another way that I can edit is by going to the Field to Finish inspector. That brings up this panel at the bottom of my screen. And for instance, if I pick the code BC, notice here's all the BC codes, and I can see there's some of them that are sequential, and then there's a break in between them. This zoomed me to them. If I check the isolate option, it isolates and only shows those BC codes and the lines that it drew.
Hey, Rick.
Yes.
Tim has a question about connecting the top to the toe.
Yes. If you want to connect the top to the toe, we could do that by double coding it or using multiple codes. And I'll show you that in just a second. That's a good question. So if I want to clean this up, for example, if I zoom in here, I can really kind of see, get my cursor to show back up. There we are. That I really had two buildings here, 1210 through 1213, and 1213 should have closed. And then 1214 through 1217 and 1217 should have closed. So what I can do is pick that instance. It was 1213 that should have closed. So after BC, I'm going to type in CLS, because that was my close code. I'll pick apply. It's going to save that as the new description. It redraws all the field to finish. And now that's just one instance. And notice it hatched it for me automatically because I told the BC code when we set it up, anytime that was that it had something closed to hatch it. So I could do the same thing here with 1217. That's a CLS. It'll take a minute to reprocess that. And 1404 should be the same thing. So that allows me to update those as I go. If I turn off the isolate option, everything is going to display there again. I can go back to it, and I'll just exit out of the editor. We could do the same type of editing that we've done there. So I'm not suggesting that you would have that you would do nothing different in the field and just dump things in and figure it out as you go. But you could use that as a starting point, because now I do have an FLD file. And if I simply tell my field guys, put an end statement every time you're done drawing a line, how much farther would we get if they just added that one command? It would clean up, it would clean up this area. Any of these that are jumping around would automatically be cleaned up. Is this perfect and doing everything? No, but could we do a lot with just that one command? Now, if they put begins and ends in, it doesn't hurt anything. Somebody described that to me as the belt and suspenders approach. You can have both, but you don't necessarily need them. And the other way to approach this is, here we have tops, toes, and tops. If you put these in as, coded these as top 1 and top 2, then I don't even need a begin or end, because all the top 1s would connect, all the top 2s would connect, and they wouldn't go across. And when you move on someplace else, you do top 3 and 4. So you could do that without any begins or ends. That also means that you could connect, you don't have to walk along the strings sequentially. If this was top 1, this was toe 1, this is top 2, I could just go across, then top 2, toe 1, top 1, top 1, toe 1, top 2. And I could pick this up cross-sectionally, and it wouldn't zigzag across. And I also don't have to put in a bunch of begins and ends and continues and all that stuff. It just knows that only the top 1s connect to the top 1s and the top 2s connect to the top 2s. So if you want to number those, if you think about doing that on like a road segment, where you're picking up edges of pavements, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, if you just number them sequentially like that, it makes it very easy, and you really don't have to pick up any additional coding for begins and ends at that point. So this is a good spot for us to take a bit of a break and just take some questions. Do we have any questions coming in, or did we kind of grab some of those as we went? I'm not hearing anything from Lori, so I'm assuming that we are probably good. And I can't hear from you all because, oh, there she is.
No more other questions. That was the latest one about the top to 10.
Perfect. Yeah. Let me jump back to that erase points question. If I went under my points pull down, you'll see there is an erase point command here. This, when I pick it, at the command line, it says, how do you want to pick them? By typing in a number, using a point group, or picking from the screen. If I pick it from the screen and then just pick one or more points, it says, do you want to delete this point from the coordinate file? Yes or no? No being the default. If you say no, it just erases it from the screen, but it's still in the CRD file. If you say yes, it says, are you really sure? And again, the default is no. So if I change my mind and say, no, I don't want to, or if I say yes, I do want to erase that, then it will say, do you want to delete the symbol or the attributes or both also? So if I say both, it deletes that point from the screen there. Now the AutoCAD undo will not bring that back. However, and this is a great tool here, if in the setup under Carlson configure, general settings, if you had turned on this option to maintain CRD history file, and I would recommend leave that turned on because it doesn't hurt and it can help. If that was turned on, I can now go back. I can go to the points area and pick the coordinate file utilities, or what is often referred to as the CFU command. If I pick that, lower right corner is point history. I can see changes I made with by editing points and with the field to finish inspector. I also have this one here, delete points. I can tell it undo that. When I close back out, notice the point is back. Now it's not displayed the same color as all the others because it didn't run through field to finish, but it's back here in the drawing and it's also in the database. So if I just reran field to finish, it would look like all the others with the display. So that's the long answer to your delete points question, but a very good question. So I'm going to jump over to a different drawing again that we can look a little bit more at this multiple coding thing. So I'm going to open up a different drawing, a different file, jump to this one. This is a little bit more advanced for those of you who are, want to take this a little farther with things and really kind of do some cool stuff. So this drawing has already got some points in it. They're in the point database as well, of course. I can see I've got edge of pavement. There's a catch basin, edge of pavement, edge of gravel, another catch basin, edge of pavement in here. With that, I'm going to just go back here and run field to finish. And I need to select my correct, or actually I need to go in and make a FLD file for this because we don't have one yet. So I'm going to pick edit codes, code table by points, just again showing you that we're not starting off with a whole bunch of work done already. I'm going to call this one PLSO 2. And I've just got edge pavement, catch basin, just a few with that. What I'm going to do is I can pick this column options. This actually shows me what columns show up in this area. So I've got like code, symbol, entity type, layer. If I wanted to put maybe something like the, you can see on my attribute ID on there, I could add that. So it shows me all these. And just for a real quick setup, I'm going to do my manhole as points only, a bunch of the others, and if I pick multiples here, those are highlighted. I can pick edit, tell it the entity there is a 3D polyline. This one at the top, I'll do a 3D polyline also. And for the catch basin, I happen to know the symbol number that I want to put in there on it. So it's going to be 256 for that one. And the manhole at the bottom, I'm going to use number 4. Again, just to kind of be quick with it if we can. I'll also do select all, changes attribute ID to 2. Oops, I didn't give it to me.
so it does look better. So just a little bit of setup, not much. I basically told it a few of these are going to be 3D polylines. I'll save this, exit, and just tell it okay to run this. And this looks like kind of a mess at this point. Now let me show you real quickly what I'm trying to get it to go from. So if I go, I've got an image of this I can show you. This on the left is basically what we just drew. These dashed lines on the right are what we want it to be. So really there should be a curve that goes through this area, a curve through this area that connects our edge of pavement and our catch basin and edge of gravel. And the edge of gravel should be 2 lines, and then this should be a house and this should be a shed. So let me switch back over to AutoCAD and let's see if we can set that up. And just real briefly, it looks like Brian asked a question, is there a standard out-of-the-box FLD file that you could look at the codes and line work and symbols and build from there? Carlson does have a couple FLD files that do install with the program that you can look at. So you can definitely get some examples from that, Brian, because yeah, I'm totally hear you that looking at the blank screen and trying to come up with it is the first time may not be easy. So there are some examples there. But this is where we get into multiple coding. And if I look at this, now this came pretty close to just straight through here, but if I pick this purple line, you'll see there is no vertex at point 101. This catch basin should also be an edge of pavement. So I'm just going to double click on it. And I'm telling it this in the CRD file description, and this could have been entered in the field also, and would have been a big help for me. I'm going to put in a space EP. So this is a catch basin and an edge of pavement. So when it processes this, it's going to go through that point. So actually just let me go back and I'm just going to run that again. Notice now it says, I found a multiple code. And EP is not a command in my special codes. So do I want to split all multiple codes? Yes. I want to split them all. When I run that, if I can pick it, it runs through it, and notice I get a vertex there now. So if I went to this next one, this actually should be the beginning of a curve. So I'm going to use a command code there of PC, EP space PC. So that knows it's a command to run that. The next one, EOG, should be the edge of gravel and an edge of pavement. So that's going to take this curve and run it through that point. This one is going to be the edge of gravel and edge of pavement and the PT. So it's the end of the curve as well. So you can mix multiple codes and command codes. This catch basin on 105 should also be in EP.
And then 106 is the EP. Now here, for this one, instead of just drawing a line straight across the middle of the road, this could either be a begin on this EP, or I can call this one EP2, like we said before we could do. So this one would also be EP2. 109 is the catch basin, but it's also a catch basin and EP2. Now, sequence is a little bit important here because the catch basin, we wanted it to grab a particular symbol. So the first code gets the symbol. The second one is just going to be used for line work. And there are settings for that as well that determine that. I can show those to you in a minute. 110 is going to be an EP2. And actually, I'm going to go back. 108 was EP2, and it was going to be the PC. That's a catch basin and an EP2. This one's an EP2 and the PT. So anytime that you do PC and PT, if you just do PC, it's by default a 3-point curve. If you do PC and PT, it fits the curve through all of the points in between those two. And this one here will also be an EP2. So let's take, I'm going to stop there and say, let's rerun this. So we should have a nice arc on that side. Break this, all the EP2s will connect. We'll start an arc. It'll go through the catch basin, the other catch basin, and end the arc over here. So if I run field to finish, tell it to split my multiple codes, okay to run it. And this all of a sudden looks a lot better. Now we got the arc running between here. Because I drew this as a 3D polyline, it's showing, multiple vertices through that. Same thing on the other side, but it's using the catch basin and the edge of pavement as points along that line. Now this driveway we could fix, really the same way. Because on, here we've got 104. This should have been, this is EOG. That's EOG. 103 is also an edge of gravel, and we could change these by going back to this one and saying this should be EOG 2, and this one should be EOG 2. But also this 114 would be a driveway and an EOG.
Rick, did you see that question from Nathan here in the Zoom chat?
Yeah, I just saw it. Let me read that and answer it here. So let's just see what I did here before I jump into that question. But if I run that again, now I get the driveway cleaned up. So the question from Nathan for everyone was, are there instances where you would recommend editing the line work directly instead of points and rerunning field to finish? Or is it best practice to edit the points if using field to finish? That's a great question. And there are certainly times I would say, if it's easier to just edit the line work directly, do that. Just remember, if you've done that, you don't want to run field to finish again because it's going to undo your edits when it redraws. And that's where, if you have some changes that you wanted to rerun field to finish, I would be very careful then and go in and tell it which points to rerun. Rather than I've been rerunning everything every time, you can limit and say, you know, I only want to rerun points 122 and 123, you know, for instance, or, you know, a certain point group. Then you wouldn't erase all of the changes that you've made. So something to be careful with there. But certainly there are going to be times that you're close enough if you think, well, just a couple extends and trims and I'm going to be done with this. I don't need to go back and edit all my points. But if you ever want to rerun those points in field to finish, just be aware it's best to edit the points themselves. So I'm going to do one other thing here, just a couple to finish these up, as we're talking about these multiple codes. For the driveway, this was actually going to be the driveway and a PC. That goes through this next point and then goes up to the house, which is the house and a driveway, DRV. So now, if I, the other one I was going to do here is 121. That could be a close on our house, and 120, if I go back to it, I can do an offset here. I mean, there was supposed to be a point in here that we did not get, and by going to point 120 and doing a command on that one, I can update it so that it offsets and picks that line up correctly. So 120 is going to be a house space, and I'm going to use the jog command. So jog -8. So it's going to go 8 feet to the right as it came along that. So now when I rerun it, you see here, it didn't create a point, but it just used that for line work. Because I knew that there was a jog in the house of 8 feet to the left. So I did, jog -8. The other thing is I can do this shed. I only got 2 points on the shed, but we know it's a rectangle because we had some field notes, and we know it's 8 feet as well. So if I do shed space RACT for rectangle, 8, and rerun that. Notice there I've got the shed at a 8-foot offset. Now my actual points in the CRD file now look like this. You'll see, here's the double coding of catch basin and edge of pavement in the PC. And if you do more coding like that in the field, obviously it's going to draw something much more complete like I have here. But you could also clean it up in the office or take this incrementally. Don't feel like you have to do this all at once, all to start with. So I'm going to go back to field to finish real quick here, just to kind of wrap up a couple of the things that we talked about. When I go to edit codes, remember, these are the settings for the individual point codes that we're using. But if I go to code table settings, I have options here with special codes. Notice here's the close command I used. The rectangle, I could change what those commands are. Here was PC and PT. Again, I could change what any of those are. That's why those different commands, and those are really all that I used. I used the beginning and end of curve, close, and rectangle. Notice there's OH for offset horizontal, OV for offset vertical. So if you wanted to have another line created that's an offset of one, maybe like the top of curve or back of curve or something like that, you could type those in. Offset both horizontally and vertically that way. And when I cancel out of this, here's this option for use multiple codes. Notice mine said line work only. There's line work and points and line work and symbols. So if you did line work and points, every place that I had a multiple code, like a EP and CBN, it would create 2 points there with the same point number, which is kind of weird, to be honest. But they would make duplicate points at that location. Line work and symbols is if you want both points to get their symbol, that would work. I often just do line work only because the multiple coding is where I'm usually, using line work. I just want to use the same code for the edge of pavement and the driveway, or fence 1 and fence 2 where they intersect or something like that. So we did have a question just come in from Tim. Can edits be made in the FLD file and also keep FLD file also to keep and clean the edits? So you can definitely have multiple FLD files. Remember, anytime I'm here and making edits, I can do a save as. Now remember, the FLD file is just the parameters you're using to set up the codes. You can also, when I was editing all these points, I was editing the CRD file. And you can create multiple CRD files also. You could have an original CRD file and and an edited one. Back on the points tab here, there's a button that says set your CRD file. And I could go out and have multiple here's. Oh, and your question was meaning each day's work. Yeah, so yeah, you could again, you can handle that a couple different ways. If you had each day's work as part of a point group, for instance, you could process through field to finish only certain point groups. So when I go to field to finish, I can pick not all the points, but I could pick a particular group, and I could have a group for each day. That would work. That's probably the way I would do it. You could also put each day's work in a separate CRD file, but I think that might be a little more cumbersome. But you should be able to handle it that way. All right, well, why don't I'll open it up if there's any other questions. It looks like we're right at 10 o'clock, so I'm kind of running out of time. This is obviously something that we could talk about for hours because you can get really deep into field to finish if you want to. I'm sure some of you will want to take it that direction. If you're starting off, I would say, don't think that you have to do it all at once. Phase it in, kind of do it incrementally and start with the easy stuff that's going to gain you the most, and then expand as you go from there. And before you know it, I think you'll be doing really well. And I know this is a feature that can save you a lot of time. So any other questions that people have before we give you all a break? There. The question from Nathan, looks like it came in, is there a limit to the number of special codes assigned to a point? No, not that I am aware of. I have seen if there is a limit, it's probably longer than what you want to type. I'll put it that way. So because you can definitely apply horizontal and vertical offsets to the same code. I've done that with this data set before, where we do, edge of pavement, offset a certain amount horizontal, a certain amount vertical to create a 3D polyline going along the back of curb with that. So definitely something you can do. All right, any other questions?
I'm not seeing any other questions either in Whova, and you answered Nathan's in Zoom, so.
Great. I see Peter said thank you. Thank you, Peter. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, but virtually at least that's good. So good to see you, and thank you. And I guess we will take our break now. We'll come back at 10:30. Correct, Lori? For the
Yep.
For the next one?
I'll see you about 10:20 in your Zoom and onboard you into Whova.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, everybody get a chance to stretch your legs, grab some coffee, and we will see you all for some, or whoever wants to come back for some tips and tricks stuff at 10:30.